At a bright spring festival, where families laughed beneath strings of warm lights, a woman stepped in to apply for a job with bruises still fading beneath the sleeves she refused to roll up. She kept a polite smile on her lips, but behind it were sleepless nights, shouted words, and the silent endurance she carried so her child wouldn't have to hear the worst of it. Her hands trembled not from the cold, but from the memory of tight grips, slamming doors, and the quiet promise she kept telling herself, just survive one more day. No one noticed the signs, until a former Navy SEAL paused, and the German shepherd at his side went still, sensing something the room refused to see. The eyes of a man shaped by war, and the instinct of a loyal dog aligned in the same silent truth. Something here was wrong. In the crisp northern light of a peaceful morning, that moment became the turning point in a family's fate. Where are you watching from? Like and subscribe as we move toward 1,000 followers, because every follow gives us the strength to keep telling stories that matter. And now, let's begin. Morning in northern Vermont did not arrive loudly. It unfolded. The frost loosened its grip on the fields in a slow shimmer, and the lake beyond the tree line exhaled a thin veil of mist, as if the water itself were testing the air before committing to spring. Pine needles held beads of meltwater like clear medals pinned to their dark coats. Somewhere in the distance, a snowplow blade scraped once across asphalt, late for the season, reluctant to surrender its purpose. Silas Sly Merritt ran before the sun cleared the ridge. He ran the way he did everything measured, even quiet. At 35, he stood just over 6 feet tall, his build compact and controlled, strength coiled rather than displayed. No beard softened his face. He shaved daily, leaving the clean geometry of a square jaw and high cheekbones exposed to the cold. His dark brown hair was cut close in a military style, just a touch longer than regulation enough to remind the world he was no longer on active duty, but not enough to let discipline drift. His skin carried the pale tone of northern winters, wind burnished along the cheekbones and nose. His eyes were gray-blue. People often held his gaze a moment too long before looking away. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't warmth. It was a look that had seen things and survived them, and it made others aware of themselves in uncomfortable ways. He wore the same clothes he wore most days, an old olive tactical combat shirt, faded at the shoulders and softened from years of washing, sleeves slightly worn at the cuffs. Beneath it, the edge of a dark red thermal layer showed at the collar, the only color that hinted at heat. His combat pants were earth-toned and weathered, knees scuffed, cargo pockets sagging with habitual use. Work boots military issue once had molded themselves to his stride. On his wrist sat a scratched field watch that had timed more than miles. He did not run alone. Atlas moved beside him without a leash. The German shepherd was 5 years old, sable-coated in gradients of cream, gray, and black that caught the early light in shifting layers. His eyes were amber and alert. His build was lean, not show dog broad, but working dog precise. A black harness with a dark red trim circled his torso, fitted but not tight, the handle along the spine worn smooth from Silas's grip. Atlas did not pull. He did not lag. He matched Silas stride for stride, ears scanning, nose tasting the air. They ran along the pine trail that skirted the lake and cut toward town. Silas focused on his breath, the rhythm steady. Inhale 4 steps. Exhale 4. Civilian air still felt different in his lungs. He had been home 2 years. Home. Oh, in theory. He had grown up in this town, A grid of quiet streets and wood-framed houses pressed between forest and water, but coming back from the teams had not restored anything. It had only removed noise. Without deployments, without mission briefings, without the blunt clarity of objectives, the world had become ambiguous. Atlas had been the only certainty that crossed back with him. They had met overseas. Atlas, then barely 2, had been attached to a K-9 unit assigned to Silas's element during a series of operations in terrain that did not forgive mistakes. It was Atlas who had halted at the edge of a dry irrigation trench one night, muscles rigid, nose locked on something no human eye could see. And it was Atlas who refused to move forward until handlers swept the ground and uncovered the pressure plate that would have erased 3 men from existence. Silas still remembered the silence afterward, the way the wind had moved through sand, as if nothing had almost happened. He had signed the paperwork months later to adopt Atlas when both were rotated out. Some partnerships did not require words. They slowed as town emerged from the trees. The first building they passed was Lakeshore Community Center, a wide, cedar-sided structure with broad windows that reflected the pale morning sky. Silas taught strength conditioning there 3 evenings a week, mostly for teenagers and a handful of former service members who needed structure more than weights. The town itself was waking. A bakery door swung open, releasing the scent of yeast and sugar into the air. A delivery truck idled near the curb. Somewhere a radio crackled with a weather update about melting snowpack levels. Atlas's ears shifted. Silas felt it before he saw it, the subtle change in the dog's gait. Atlas slowed. Not enough to stop the run. Just enough. Silas glanced down. "What is it?" Atlas's head angled toward the farmer's market lot across the street. Vendors were setting up early for the weekend reopening. Folding tables clacked into place. Canvas awnings snapped in the wind. A woman stood near the edge of the lot, unloading boxes from the back of a compact SUV. She was new to Silas's line of sight. She appeared late 20s, maybe early 30s, around 5'5". Slim, but not fragile. Her hair light brown with a wash of gold was pulled into a low tie at the nape of her neck. A few strands had escaped, catching light against skin that held the faint translucence of someone who spent long winters indoors. Her face was open in structure, soft jaw, clear lines, but fatigue traced itself beneath her eyes like pencil shading. She wore a long-sleeve sweater in a muted gray-blue tone and dark jeans. Practical shoes? Nothing decorative. Beside her stood a boy. 6, perhaps. Small for his age, shoulders slightly rounded inward, as if he'd learned to occupy less space. His hair was the same shade as hers, cut unevenly. He watched the parking lot rather than the sky, his eyes moving with cautious calculation. Atlas stopped. Fully. Silas halted with him. The German shepherd did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply planted himself in the center of the sidewalk, body aligned toward the woman and child. His nose lifted. Silas felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Atlas was trained to detect explosives, accelerants, fear responses, cortisol spikes, chemical signatures invisible to most. Over time, Silas had learned to trust the dog's reactions more than his own instincts. The woman glanced up. Her eyes met Silas's across the distance. They were a pale gray-blue, lighter than his, and there was something in them that flickered too fast to name. Atlas took one step forward. The woman stiffened. It was subtle. A microsecond contraction at the shoulders. Silas noticed. The boy noticed Atlas. For a fraction of a second, the boy's face lit, not with joy, but recognition. Then he looked toward the parking lot again, scanning. Silas crossed the street slowly. "Morning," he said, his voice low, even. The woman nodded. "Morning." Her voice was steady, but Atlas had moved closer now, nose angled toward her wrist. She shifted her arm slightly, unconsciously. Atlas's ears went back. Not aggression. Alertness. Silas crouched beside him. Easy. The woman attempted a small smile. He's beautiful. His name's Atlas. The boy spoke before she could respond. His voice was soft. Is he police? Silas studied him. No, he just likes to pay attention. The boy nodded, as if that made sense. Atlas leaned forward and inhaled near the woman's sleeve. She pulled it down instinctively, covering her wrist. Silas's eyes tracked the movement. A shadow of discoloration, half hidden, edged along the base of her hand. Bruising. Faded. Not fresh. She saw him notice. Her chin lifted a fraction. I'm fine, she said quickly. The words landed too fast. Silas did not respond immediately. He had learned that silence could either close doors or keep them open. He chose neutral ground. We run through here most mornings. Market's back this weekend? Yes, she said. First one since the thaw. The boy stepped closer to Atlas. Atlas lowered his head to the child's height, ears softening. The boy reached out, hesitated, then touched the dog's fur. Atlas did not move. The woman exhaled, almost imperceptibly. Then, a truck engine revved behind them. Atlas's head snapped toward the sound. Silas stood. A black pickup idled at the far edge of the lot. Company lettering on the side panel read, North Pine Renovations. The driver remained inside, window down. A man leaned his arm across the doorframe. Early 30s. Broad shoulders, clean cut. Hair trimmed short, lighter brown than Silas's. And his face was open and symmetrical in the way that photographs well. He wore a fitted jacket and jeans that looked new, unscuffed. He smiled toward the woman. Not at Silas. At her. Atlas's posture changed. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was tension. The woman's spine straightened. The boy's hand withdrew from Atlas. The man called out, voice casual. You good, Maeve? Maeve. So that was her name. She nodded. Yeah. Silas filed the name away without meaning to. The truck did not move immediately. The man watched for a beat longer than necessary. Then the engine shifted and the vehicle rolled toward the exit. Atlas remained rigid until the pickup turned onto the main road. Only then did he breathe out. Silas felt something cold settle behind his ribs. He looked at Maeve again. Her expression had returned to neutral composure. Controlled. Deliberate. The boy stared after the truck. Silas broke the moment. We'll keep moving. Maeve nodded again. Atlas hesitated before following. Silas did not look back, but he felt the weight of the encounter travel with him down the street. Halfway down Maple Street, Atlas stopped again. Not at a person, at nothing visible. He turned his head back toward the market lot and let out a single, low sound, not a growl, not a whine. Something in between. A vibration more than a noise. Silas followed his gaze. The black pickup had reappeared at the far intersection. It was not parked. It was not idling. It was simply there. Watching. For a moment that stretched too long. Then it moved on. Atlas's muscles eased. Silas felt the past brush the present. He had learned in places far from Vermont that some threats announce themselves loudly. Others arrive smiling. He resumed the run. The town unfolded around them in ordinary ways. Mrs. Klein, the bakery owner, a short, round woman in her 60s, with flour permanently dusted into the creases of her hands, waved from her doorway. And she had known Silas since he was 10, and still looked at him with a mix of pride and worry she did not bother hiding. "Back at it early, Sly?" she called. "Always," he replied. She glanced at Atlas. "That dog knows more than you do." "Probably." Mrs. Klein laughed and disappeared inside. Silas did not mention the truck. He did not mention the bruise. He finished the route. Back at his cabin, set just beyond the tree line where town thinned into forest, he removed his boots at the door and set them in their usual place. Atlas circled once before lying down near the window. Silas poured water into a steel bowl. The cabin was simple wood stove, narrow couch, a table scarred by years of use. A photograph rested on a shelf. 4 men in desert uniforms, dust-streaked, smiling at something outside the frame. Silas rarely looked at it. He washed his face at the sink, studying his reflection. Square jaw, gray-blue eyes. Still here. He had come home to quiet. He had told himself that was enough. But Atlas did not react to quiet without reason. Silas moved to the window. Through the trees, he could see the road that led toward town. He imagined Maeve unloading her boxes. Imagined the boy scanning parking lots before looking at the sky. He imagined the truck engine. He did not let the thought expand. He had learned the cost of assumption. Atlas lifted his head and met his gaze. No bark. No signal. Just awareness. Silas checked his watch. He would be at Lakeshore later that afternoon to prep equipment for evening training. He would likely see her again. He did not know what he would say. He only knew one thing. Atlas had stopped. And Atlas did not stop without cause. Silas turned away from the window and began cleaning his gear. Outside, the frost finished melting. The lake surface broke into small ripples. The day advanced like nothing at all had shifted. But somewhere between pine needles and parking lots, something had. And Silas Merritt, who had survived war and returned to silence, felt the faint, an unwelcome certainty that silence was about to change shape. He did not know how. He only knew he would stay. By afternoon, the thaw had done what it always did in northern Vermont, turned the world into a contradiction. Sunlight poured clean and bright across snowbanks that still refused to disappear. Meltwater ran in thin, shining threads along the gutters, and every shadow smelled faintly of wet earth waking up. The lake looked calmer than it had any right to be, a sheet of blue glass framed by pines so dark they made the sky seem paler. Silas Merritt drove into town with the windows cracked, letting cold air rinse the cabin scent from his shirt. Atlas rode in the back seat, harness on, head angled toward the moving world, as if the road itself might say something useful. He didn't pant the way other dogs did. He watched. He listened. His amber eyes tracked pedestrians, squirrels, the flutter of a plastic bag skittering along the curb. Silas parked behind Lakeshore Community Center and stepped out into the mixed smell of cedar siding, damp grass, and old gym mats. The building sat low and wide, its big front windows catching the sun like a quiet dare. Come in, be normal, stay a while. Normal had become something Silas practiced the way people practiced piano scales. Repetition. Discipline. Small improvements you couldn't measure daily but hoped would accumulate. He carried a crate of resistance bands and first aid supplies inside. His boots thudded softly on the polished floor. The place was mostly empty at this hour. Just a few staff, a janitor humming off-key in the hallway, and the faint echo of basketballs from a youth program in the gym. Atlas padded beside him, nails clicking lightly. They passed the front desk, a broad counter of laminated wood. Behind it sat a woman Silas hadn't seen before. Maeve Holloway looked different indoors than she had at the market. The overhead lights smoothed shadows across her face, but the fatigue remained, threaded beneath her eyes like something that didn't wash off with sleep. Her hair was still tied low, slightly neater now, but a few strands escaped anyway, curling against the side of her cheek, as if refusing the idea of control. She wore the same muted gray-blue sweater, sleeves tugged down to her wrists. Her posture was polite, contained shoulders slightly forward, like she was bracing for an impact that never quite arrived. Her eyes flicked up when Silas entered. Recognition flashed there, then caution. Atlas slowed without being told. Silas did not stop this time. He kept his pace neutral, the way Elise Marlowe had once described in a short conversation that stuck with him. Approach like you're offering a chair, not a rescue. He nodded. Afternoon. Maeve's mouth tightened into a small smile. Hi. Her voice was softer here, as if walls made sound dangerous. A boy sat on a plastic chair near the desk, our legs swinging too high above the floor. Noah. He held a folded brochure in his hands and stared at it as if paper could predict the future. When Silas came close, Noah's eyes lifted not to Silas first, but to Atlas. Atlas's ears softened. His tail moved once, slow and deliberate, as if he was careful not to make too much promise. Noah slid off the chair and took one tentative step forward. Maeve's hand twitched as if to stop him. She didn't. Silas set the crate down gently. You're here with your mom? Noah nodded. Silas knew better than to ask why the child wasn't in school, better than to make assumptions about schedules in lives he didn't understand. So he offered an easier question. You like dogs? Noah glanced at Maeve as if checking permission. Then he whispered, Yeah. Atlas lowered himself, front legs folding, chest to the floor. He made himself smaller, less intimidating, more invitation. Noah reached out and touched Atlas's fur again, fingers sinking into the thick coat along the dog's neck. His hand trembled with the kind of carefulness that didn't belong to a 6-year-old. Silas felt something tighten behind his ribs. He'd seen that tremor on grown men holding weapons. Seeing it on a child made his mind search for explanations it didn't want. Maeve spoke quickly, filling the silence. I'm just covering the desk for a couple hours. They needed someone. Silas's gaze stayed gentle. You work here? Part-time, she said. Starting today. He had helped coordinate schedules at Lakeshore. He hadn't been told, which meant either the center was short-staffed enough to pull anyone they could true, or someone had hired her quietly and quickly, also true. He didn't ask which. Welcome, he said. Maeve's shoulders dropped by a fraction, like she'd been holding them up with effort. Thanks. Atlas stood again, and moved away from Noah, giving the child space. That, too, felt deliberate. Silas picked up his crate and headed toward the storage room. Atlas followed at heel. Behind him, Maeve's voice returned to a professional tone as the phone rang. Lakeshore Community Center. How can I help you? It was ordinary. It should have stayed ordinary, but something about the way she straightened at the sound too fast, too practiced told Silas that ordinary had teeth for her. Silas spent the next hour prepping the training room. He stacked mats, checked equipment, tightened a loose bolt on a squat rack. The work soothed him. In the teams, you learned to trust your hands when your head got loud. Atlas roamed the edges of the room and then settled near the door, facing outward. Guarding. Not paranoid, just attentive. Silas caught himself watching the clock. He told himself it was about class timing. He knew it wasn't only that. When he stepped out to refill a water jug, he saw Maeve again through the glass wall of the lobby. She was speaking to an older man who had stepped up to the desk. The man was small-town familiar. Ransom Hedrick, accounting volunteer, mid-40s, with a narrow face, thinning hair, and the mild impatience of someone who believed spreadsheets should behave like obedient dogs. He leaned on the counter and spoke with easy friendliness. Maeve nodded at something he said. Her smile looked real for half a second. Then it faded, as if she'd remembered smiling cost something. Ransom walked away. Maeve exhaled. Her fingers went to her sleeve, tugging it down again. Silas's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way his mind was assembling patterns. Patterns could save you. Patterns could also make you wrong. He focused on the jug, on the cold water sloshing against plastic, on the plain physics of it. Atlas rose and came to his side, as if sensing the shift. Silas rested a hand briefly on the dog's harness handle. A grounding point. Later, as evening approached, the building began to fill. Teenagers arrived in groups, laughing too loudly, shaking off spring jackets, smelling of deodorant and impatience. A couple of older veterans drifted in, faces weathered, movements stiff, looking for structure without admitting it. Silas turned into the instructor version of himself, voice calm, directives clear, praise minimal but meaningful. He didn't joke much, but he wasn't cold. The kids listened because he didn't waste words. Atlas stayed near the wall, observing the room the way he observed everything. Like danger could appear wearing normal clothes. Maeve was still at the desk when class ended. Noah sat with coloring sheets now, crayons scattered like tiny weapons. He glanced up every time someone walked too close to the door. Silas noticed the way Maeve watched the parking lot through the front windows, but her eyes checking the same angle again and again. It wasn't curiosity, it was timing. When the last teenager left, Silas walked toward the lobby, towel around his neck. Atlas followed. Maeve looked up. Her expression was polite, controlled. Silas kept his voice neutral. "You closing up?" "In a few minutes," she said. Noah slipped off his chair and came closer to Atlas again, as if the dog had become the one safe object in the room. Atlas leaned his head down to Noah's height. Noah whispered something Silas almost didn't catch. "He's quiet." Maeve's fingers tightened on the counter edge. "Noah." Silas didn't correct the kid. Quiet was a compliment in this household, apparently. He nodded at the front doors. "Need help carrying anything to your car?" Maeve's eyes widened. For a moment, fear not gratitude rose first. Then she masked it. "I'm okay." There it was again. The quick, okay. Too fast, too sharp, like a shield. Silas didn't push. "All right." He turned slightly, making space. No pressure. Us an open door, not a shove. Maeve swallowed. "Thank you, though." Atlas's ears angled toward the parking lot. Silas followed the dog's attention. A black pickup truck rolled slowly past the building's entrance. North Pine Renovations. Same lettering. Same dark paint. It didn't stop. It didn't need to. It was close enough to be seen. Maeve's face went still. Not calm still. Animal still. Noah's hand clamped around Atlas's harness strap. The truck continued down the road and disappeared. Maeve exhaled shakily and looked down, as if ashamed her body had reacted. Silas didn't mention it. The most dangerous thing, Elise had once said, was being forced to explain your fear. The lobby phone rang. Maeve reached for it instantly, too instantly, like her hand moved before her mind agreed. She answered. "Lakeshore Community Center." Silas couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but he heard Maeve's. It changed. It became smaller, softer. The words spaced out, as if she was choosing each one carefully to avoid stepping on glass. Yes, I'm still here. No, I said I'm still here. I'll be out in a minute. Her eyes flicked toward Noah, then back to the floor. Silas felt his stomach drop with a recognition he hated. This wasn't a casual check-in. It was a leash. Maeve hung up, hands trembling just enough that the receiver clicked twice before settling. She forced a smile at Silas like nothing had happened. Atlas rose, slow and silent, and positioned himself between Maeve and the front doors. Not aggression. Protection. As if the dog had decided, this is where the line is. Silas didn't know what to do with that, but he knew he wouldn't forget it. Maeve gathered Noah's crayons into a bag with quick, efficient movements. Her hands moved like someone packing in a hurry, not because she was late, but because she believed being late could be punished. Silas pretended to wipe down a bench near the entrance, giving her distance while staying close enough to matter if something happened. Atlas watched the doors. Outside, the sky had turned the pale gold of late winter afternoons. Meltwater reflected the streetlights like scattered coins. Maeve stepped from behind the desk. We should go. Noah hugged his coloring pages to his chest. He glanced at Atlas, and for a moment his face did something rare. It softened, like a child remembering he was allowed to trust. Maeve reached for Noah's hand. Her fingers lingered on his wrist as if making sure he was solid. Silas cleared his throat. You live far? Maeve's eyes sharpened again. Not far. That wasn't an answer. It was a boundary. Silas respected it. Be safe. Maeve nodded once, tight. We will. She moved toward the door. Atlas shifted with her, staying just to her side, close enough to be felt without touching. For a second, Maeve paused. Her gaze landed on Silas's face. He saw something there, an internal debate flashing behind her eyes. A question she didn't ask, and a hope she didn't trust. Then the moment passed. She opened the door and stepped into the cold. Noah followed, glancing back once at Atlas like he was leaving a lighthouse behind. Atlas remained inside, watching through the glass as they crossed the lot toward a small SUV. Maeve's shoulders stayed lifted the entire walk, as if she expected a shout to strike her from behind. When she and Noah drove away, Atlas didn't move for a long moment. Silas stood beside him, staring at the empty lot. This was the problem with beautiful towns. The sunlight could make anything look safe, and sometimes that safety was the most convincing lie of all. Silas turned off the lobby lights and locked the doors the way he always did, twice, checking the latch. Atlas followed him down the hallway toward the storage room. Silas's mind replayed Maeve's phone voice, small, controlled, apologetic, and the way Atlas had placed himself between her and the door, as if instinct had become law. Silas had spent a career learning when to act. He'd also spent 2 years learning when not to. Tonight, he did neither. He simply held the image in his mind like a file marked "Do Not Ignore." And in the quiet, after everyone left, that file felt heavier than it should have. Silas woke before dawn. He always did. The northern sky outside his cabin window was still the color of slate, not yet committed to morning. Frost traced thin veins along the glass, fragile and temporary. The wood stove had burned low in the night, leaving the air cool enough to sharpen breath. Atlas was already awake. The German shepherd lay near the door, head up, ears angled toward something distant only he seemed to hear. 5 years old, sable coat blending cream, gray and black in disciplined gradients, Atlas carried the stillness of a working dog even at rest. His amber eyes tracked movement without turning his head. His harness black with dark red trim hung neatly on the wall beside the door. Silas swung his legs off the bed and sat there for a moment, elbows on knees. He didn't replay the previous evening, not consciously, but the memory of tension lived somewhere beneath his ribs, like a splinter he hadn't decided to pull. He stood, shaved carefully in the small bathroom mirror, face clean, jawline sharp in the dim light, skin wind-worn from years of cold air and worse climates. He dressed in the same worn tactical shirt, the fabric softened by use, the faint fading along the sleeves mapping seasons he no longer counted. Atlas rose when Silas reached for the harness. Outside, the air bit clean and bright. They ran along the edge of the lake, boots and paws finding rhythm on the damp earth where snow had receded. Silas's breathing stayed controlled. Atlas kept pace effortlessly, glancing up occasionally as if checking Silas's posture rather than his speed. The town still slept, which was why Silas noticed it immediately. A small SUV parked along Maple Street, engine off, windows fogged from the inside. Maeve's car. He didn't slow. He didn't stare. And he ran past as if he hadn't seen it. But Atlas's head turned. Silas's jaw tightened. He completed the route before circling back at a distance that didn't look like circling. The SUV was gone. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself people arrived early to work all the time. He did not like that he needed to tell himself anything. By mid-morning, Lakeshore Community Center hummed with weekday noise. Children from the local elementary school filled the gym for indoor recess. Sneakers squeaked. Basketballs thudded. Laughter ricocheted off cinder block walls. Silas stood near the bleachers, arms crossed loosely, watching. He had learned something about children in the teams, oddly enough. They broadcast what adults buried. Noah stood apart from the chaos. He held a foam dodgeball but didn't throw it. His small shoulders were lifted, chin slightly tucked, as if he expected something fast to come at him even in play. Maeve stood near the doorway, speaking quietly with a tall woman wearing a navy cardigan and an ID badge clipped to her collar. Principal Dana Kessler. Dana was in her early 40s, with ash-blonde hair cut blunt at the jaw. Streaked with premature gray, she made no effort to hide. Her posture was upright without stiffness, and her eyes, clear hazel, had the directness of someone accustomed to being the adult in every room. Years ago, her husband had been injured in a logging accident outside town. The recovery had left him with a limp, and Dana with a practical, no-nonsense patience sharpened by hardship. She spoke to Maeve with calm authority. Maeve nodded too often. Silas drifted closer under the pretense of adjusting a stack of mats. Dana's voice carried just enough for him to catch. "We're not concerned academically," Dana said gently. "Noah reads above grade level. It's more participation." Maeve's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. He's just shy." Dana didn't contradict her, but her gaze shifted briefly to Noah, who flinched when a ball bounced too close. "He startles easily," Dana said. "And he doesn't respond when teachers call his name the first time." Maeve swallowed. "He's sensitive." Silas saw the word land between them like a compromise. Sensitive. A safe word for something sharper. Dana rested her hand lightly on Maeve's arm. "We have a counselor available if you'd ever like to talk." Maeve's eyes flicked toward Noah again, then toward the parking lot. "Thank you," she said quickly. "We're fine." Silas felt the old instinct rise, intervene, identify the threat, neutralize. He folded his arms tighter instead. Intervention without invitation could close doors permanently. Atlas stood beside him, silent, watching Noah. Later that afternoon, Silas stepped outside to stack folding chairs near the entrance. The sky was painfully blue. Snowmelt dripped from the roof in steady rhythm. Maeve emerged a few minutes later, Noah at her side. They were leaving early. Noah held a paper cup of hot chocolate in both hands. Maeve looked tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Silas nodded. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Yes." It wasn't defensive this time. It was resigned. Noah looked at Atlas. Atlas walked forward slowly, tail neutral. Noah reached out. This time, instead of petting, he leaned his forehead gently against Atlas's neck. Just for a second. Atlas did not move. Silas felt something shift in his chest. Children didn't lean into strangers like that, not unless they were searching for something solid. As Maeve guided Noah toward the SUV, Atlas stiffened. Not growling, not barking. Stillness. His ears angled toward the road behind the center. Silas followed his line of sight. A dark sedan idled at the far end of the lot. Windows tinted. Engine low. It wasn't the same vehicle from before. Different make, different shape. But it had the same quality of presence. Once waiting without approaching. Maeve's shoulders drew tight the instant she noticed it. Noah's hand gripped her coat. Silas felt the old current run through his veins. Calculation. Angle. Distance. The sedan pulled away slowly. Not hurried. Not innocent. Just enough to say, "I was here." Atlas exhaled through his nose, a quiet huff. Silas didn't move toward the vehicle. He moved toward Maeve instead, just close enough to alter the geometry of the moment. "You need me to walk you to your car?" he asked evenly. She looked at him. Really looked at him. Fear flickered there, raw and unmasked for a heartbeat. Then pride. Then conflict. "It's okay," she said. But she didn't say it like she believed it. Silas stepped beside her anyway, not touching, not crowding, simply occupying space. Atlas walked on Maeve's outer side, Noah between them. A formation. Silas recognized it without meaning to. When they reached the SUV, what Maeve fumbled her keys once before unlocking the door. Her hands shook. "Thank you," she said, voice low. Silas nodded. Noah climbed into the back seat. Before Maeve closed her door, she paused. "You were in the military," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She inhaled as if about to ask something else. She didn't. She drove away. Silas stood in the parking lot long after the SUV turned the corner. Atlas remained at his side, gaze fixed down the road. The second vehicle's presence lingered in Silas's mind. Not as proof, as pattern. Inside, Dana Kessler stepped out of the building. She crossed her arms against the wind. "You saw that, didn't you?" Silas didn't pretend ignorance. "Yes." Dana studied him. Her face was composed, but her jaw was tight. "I've had 2 parents mention someone sitting in cars during dismissal this week." Silas's pulse slowed. Information clarified threat. "Plates?" he asked. Dana shook her head. "Different cars." That was worse. Different cars meant intention, or paranoia, and Silas forced his thoughts back into order. "Has anyone approached the building?" "No," Dana exhaled. "But I don't like it." Silas didn't either. He didn't say so. He simply nodded. "I'll keep an eye out," he said. Dana gave him a look measuring, assessing. "I know you will." That evening, back at the cabin, Silas sat at the small kitchen table. Atlas lay near the door again. The stove crackled softly. Silas's phone buzzed. Deputy Rowan Hale. Rowan's voice carried the steady drawl of someone born to the region broad-shouldered, dark beard kept trimmed close, eyes the color of storm water. Rowan had been a Marine before becoming a deputy. A roadside IED overseas had left a faint scar along his temple and a permanent habit of scanning rooftops. "You notice any vehicles hanging around the center?" Rowan asked, without preamble. "Yes," Rowan grunted. "We've had reports. Nothing actionable." "Kids?" Silas asked. "Maybe." Silas's jaw tightened. "Or maybe someone making a point," Rowan added. Silas looked toward the window. The lake reflected starlight like broken glass. "I don't like patterns without explanations," Silas said quietly. Rowan chuckled dryly. "You never did." A pause. "You planning to insert yourself?" Rowan asked. Silas didn't answer immediately. He thought of Maeve's hands, Noah's silence, Atlas placing himself without command. "No," Silas said finally. "Good," Rowan replied. "We handle what's ours." Silas ended the call. He stared at the table for a long time. Atlas rose and came to him. The dog rested his chin lightly against Silas's knee, grounding, not urging, just reminding. Silas reached down and scratched behind Atlas's ear. "I'm not going looking," he murmured. Atlas blinked slowly, but when a vehicle passed along the distant road, Atlas's ears lifted again, and Silas realized something that unsettled him more than the cars. Atlas had not reacted to every passing engine, only certain ones. The dog wasn't afraid. He was tracking. Silas leaned back in his chair. Outside, the northern night remained deceptively beautiful. Inside, a quiet line had been drawn. He didn't know yet who would cross it, but he felt, with the same certainty he once felt before storms overseas, that something had already begun, and Atlas knew it. The following week did not explode. It tightened. Northern Vermont moved further into that uneasy thaw between winter and spring. Snow receded into gray piles along the edges of parking lots. The lake shed its last sheets of dull ice, revealing water so still it reflected the sky like polished glass. The sunlight lingered longer each evening, but it carried no promise-only clarity. Silas kept his routine. He ran before dawn with Atlas pacing beside him, breath steady in the cold air. He chopped wood. He drove to Lakeshore Community Center at the same hour he always did. Discipline had once been survival. Now it was structure. Atlas rode in the passenger seat, alert but calm. The German Shepherd's sable coat caught the early light in muted layers of cream and ash and black. He watched the road without anxiety, only attention, and Silas had learned to trust that distinction. When Silas stepped into the center that Monday morning, the front desk was empty. It shouldn't have mattered. Staff rotated. Schedules changed. But the absence pressed into the space where expectation had formed. He set down a crate of medicine balls and glanced toward the lobby windows. No SUV in the lot. By 10 o'clock, Maeve still hadn't arrived. Principal Dana Kessler entered the gym with her usual purposeful stride. Her ash-blonde hair was pulled back in a tight knot, a pencil threaded through it. She looked composed, but the lines at the corners of her eyes were deeper than last week. "She called," Dana said quietly when she reached him. "Noah wasn't feeling well." Silas nodded. "Anything specific?" "She didn't say." The two words carried more than information. Silas didn't ask further. Dana returned to her clipboard. Atlas, who had been lying near the wall, lifted his head, not at the conversation, but at something beyond the building. He stood, ears angled toward the entrance, body still but alert. Silas followed the dog's gaze through the high windows. Nothing visible. Still, Atlas remained standing for several seconds before settling again. Silas filed that away. Maeve returned the next day. Late. Her SUV pulled into the lot as Silas finished a youth conditioning session. He did not approach immediately. He simply observed the way she stepped out of the vehicle. Careful, slower than usual. She wore the same gray-blue sweater. Her hair was tied back, though a few loose strands framed her face. Her shoulders were not lifted in bracing tension this time. They were lowered, but in a way that suggested exhaustion rather than ease. Noah climbed out behind her. Silas noticed the bruise before he could stop himself. A faint yellow mark along the inside of the boy's wrist. It was small. It could have been nothing. But Noah held his arm slightly inward, protective. Atlas walked forward in measured steps, tail neutral, ears relaxed. Noah saw him and managed a thin smile. Maeve followed Silas's line of sight. She gently adjusted Noah's sleeve down over the bruise. "It's from the playground," she said before Silas spoke. He hadn't asked. "I figured," he replied. The lie hung between them, fragile, unacknowledged. Silas did not challenge it. He did not validate it either. They entered the building together. Throughout the morning, Silas kept his focus on his work. He instructed teenagers through deadlifts and sprint drills, voice steady, posture composed. Atlas remained near the lobby more than usual, positioning himself with subtle intention. Noah sat near the front desk with a coloring book. Each time a locker slammed in the hallway, his shoulders jerked slightly before he caught himself. Maeve checked her phone frequently. Not openly anxious, just precise, as if measuring time against something unseen. Silas noticed. He did not comment. He had learned that pushing too early closed doors permanently. By early afternoon, the gym quieted. School groups returned to class. The building settled into a softer hum. Silas approached the desk with 2 bottles of water and placed one near Maeve's hand. "For you." She looked up, surprised. "Thanks." Her fingers brushed his briefly. Cold. "You don't have to explain anything to me," he said evenly. Her gaze sharpened. "I wasn't going to." A pause. Then softer. "I know." That was as close as he would step without invitation. It happened just after 3. The glass doors at the entrance shuddered violently. Not a polite knock, a hard shove. The metal frame rattled in its hinges. Maeve froze. Noah's head snapped up from his coloring book. Atlas was already moving. He positioned himself squarely in front of the doors, stance wide, ears high, muscles taut but silent. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply stood. Silas crossed the distance in 3 strides. Through the glass, he saw him. Gavin Mercer, early 30s, broad-shouldered from years of construction work. Dark hair trimmed unevenly, as if impatience guided the scissors. A short beard that framed a sharp jaw. His eyes were pale and restless, constantly scanning. He wore a North Pine Renovations jacket. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "Open up," Gavin called, though the doors were clearly locked. Silas stood just inside, hands relaxed at his sides. "We're closed for private programs," he said calmly. Gavin's gaze shifted past Silas to Maeve. "Maeve," he called, voice turning almost playful. You left your phone this morning. Maeve's hand instinctively went to her pocket. Her phone was there. Silas saw it. Gavin noticed the movement. His smile thinned. Noah, he added, lowering himself slightly to peer through the glass. Hey, buddy. Noah did not respond. Atlas's posture shifted, a subtle rise along the shoulders, a quiet signal. Silas stepped forward just enough to block Gavin's line of sight. If you need something official, Silas said evenly, come back during business hours. Gavin straightened. You military? He asked. Silas did not answer. The silence was enough. Gavin's gaze dropped briefly to Atlas. You training attack dogs in there? Community fitness, Silas replied. Gavin's jaw flexed. For a moment, the parking lot felt unnaturally still. Then Gavin stepped back. I just came to check on my family. The word family landed like a claim. Maeve's breathing was audible now. Silas did not break eye contact. You've seen they're fine. Gavin studied him. Tell her we'll talk tonight, he said softly. He turned, walked to his truck, and drove away without looking back. Atlas remained planted until the vehicle disappeared. Only then did he exhale. The lobby felt different after that, not louder, sharper. He's not supposed to be here, Maeve whispered. Is there a restraining order? Silas asked. She shook her head. No. Noah stood very still. Silas crouched to the boy's height. You did good, he said quietly. Noah blinked, absorbing the words as if unsure what they meant. Principal Dana Kessler appeared from the hallway, drawn by the noise. Silas summarized calmly. Dana's expression hardened. I'm calling Rowan, she said. Maeve's head lifted quickly. Please don't. This is documentation, Dana replied firmly, not escalation. The word documentation seemed to steady something. Maeve hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Deputy Rowan Hale arrived within 15 minutes. Broad-shouldered, dark beard neatly trimmed, eyes scanning without visible tension. A faint scar traced along his temple, a reminder of overseas deployments that had reshaped his patience. He examined the doorframe, took notes, asked measured questions. Did he make physical contact? Rowan asked. He pushed the door, Silas said. Not enough for charges, Rowan muttered. But enough for a report. He looked at Maeve. You want to file? Her throat worked. Yes. It was quiet, but it was firm. By the time Rowan left, the sun had dropped low enough to cast long shadows across the lot. Maeve gathered her bag slowly. Noah stood close to Atlas. Will he come back? Noah asked. Silas did not lie. I don't know. Noah nodded. Maeve paused at the door. Thank you, she said. Not automatically, not out of politeness, but deliberately. Silas inclined his head. Atlas walked with them to the edge of the lot, then stopped as Maeve unlocked her car. He did not need a command to stay. He understood the line. Silas watched the SUV disappear down the road. The building behind him was quiet again, but it was no longer untouched. A door had been shoved. A report had been filed. And something that had once been private fear was now written down in ink. Silas locked the entrance carefully, checking the latch twice, while Atlas remained near the doors a moment longer before following him inside. They did not escalate. They did not chase. They did not threaten. But they did not look away. And sometimes that was the first act of resistance. The report changed something. Not outside. Outside, northern Vermont continued its slow unraveling into spring. Snow withdrew into shadowed corners. Mud replaced frost along the shoulders of the road. The lake lay open now, its surface restless under afternoon wind. Nothing about the landscape suggested rupture. But inside Lakeshore Community Center, there was a subtle recalibration. Silas felt it the moment he walked through the doors 2 days after Gavin had shoved them. The building did not feel unsafe. It felt watched, not by a person standing there, but by consequence. Maeve was at the front desk when he arrived. On time. Composed. Her gray-blue sweater had been replaced with a pale oatmeal cardigan, softer fabric, sleeves long enough to cover her wrists completely. Her hair was tied back tighter than usual, no loose strands escaping. The effort was visible. Noah sat beside her with a small stack of books, feet swinging just above the floor. He looked pale, but alert. The bruise along his wrist had faded to the color of old sunlight. Silas nodded in greeting. "Morning." "Morning," Maeve replied. Her voice held less tremor now. Not strength exactly, but alignment. Atlas moved toward Noah without command and settled near his chair. Noah reached down automatically and rested his hand against the dog's shoulder. It was no longer tentative. It was familiar. Silas took that in. There are moments, he had learned, when silence means avoidance, and others when it means choice. He hoped this was the latter. Principal Dana Kessler appeared from the hallway carrying a folder. She wore a dark green blazer today, posture firm, eyes focused. The administrative mask fit her naturally, but Silas noticed the way she slowed near the desk, not out of suspicion, but solidarity. Deputy Hale followed up, Dana said, was keeping her tone measured. There's now a documented pattern. That matters. Maeve's fingers tightened slightly on the counter. What does that change? She asked. It means the next time isn't isolated, Dana replied. It's cumulative. Silas saw the flicker of calculation in Maeve's eyes. Next time. She absorbed the phrase without flinching. I don't want there to be a next time, she said quietly. Dana's gaze softened. Then we start planning like there won't be. Planning. That word landed differently. Silas did not speak. He understood planning. Planning was oxygen. Later that morning, a new face entered the center. Dr. Elise Marlowe. She moved with the composed economy of someone accustomed to entering rooms where people were in crisis. Mid-30s. Dark hair worn straight to her shoulders. Minimal makeup. Calm, observant brown eyes that missed very little. She dressed simply. Navy blouse, charcoal trousers, low heels that made almost no sound against the floor. She extended her hand to Maeve first. I'm Elise. Dana mentioned you might appreciate a resource conversation. Resource, not therapy, not intervention. Silas recognized the language. It preserved dignity. Maeve hesitated only briefly before shaking her hand. I don't know what I appreciate, she admitted honestly. That's all right, Elise said gently. We start with information. Noah watched Elise carefully. Atlas did too. Elise crouched slightly to Noah's level. Hi. Noah studied her, then gave a small nod. Elise did not attempt further conversation. She stood, respecting the boundary without making it visible. Silas observed from a distance. Elise's presence shifted the room in subtle ways. She did not project authority like Dana. She projected steadiness. The kind that does not push, only waits. Maeve agreed to sit with her in the small counseling room down the hall. Silas remained in the gym, but his awareness tracked the closed door. Atlas stayed near Noah, who flipped pages without reading. Time moved slowly. When Maeve emerged 40 minutes later, her eyes were red not from panic, but from release. She held a folded pamphlet in her hand. Elise followed her out, offering no dramatic gestures. Just a nod. Just space. That afternoon, as Maeve prepared to leave, Atlas did something unexpected. He did not move toward the doors. He did not position himself between her and the parking lot. Instead, he walked directly to the small trash bin near the desk and nudged it over with his nose. A folded piece of paper slipped out. Maeve stared at it. It was not hers. Silas picked it up. The paper was creased, smudged with dirt along one edge. A photograph. Maeve's SUV, taken from across the street. Silas felt his pulse drop into that cold, narrow space he recognized from another life. Maeve's breath caught. "I threw that away this morning," she whispered. The photograph showed her vehicle parked outside her apartment building. The angle was wrong, too deliberate. Elise stepped closer, eyes sharpening. "This wasn't random," she said quietly. Atlas stood very still, not alarmed. Certain, Silas looked at Maeve. She did not cry. She did not freeze. She looked at the photo like someone who had finally reached the end of denial. "He said he wasn't following me," she murmured. Noah's hand tightened in Atlas's fur. Silas spoke evenly. "This changes things." Maeve nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "It does." Deputy Rowan Hale returned within 20 minutes. He examined the photograph under the fluorescent lobby light. His jaw flexed once. "Where was this found?" he asked. "In the trash," Silas replied. Rowan's gaze shifted to Maeve. "Did he give this to you?" She shook her head. "It was in my mailbox yesterday. I didn't want Noah to see it." Rowan inhaled slowly. "That's intimidation." He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize. He simply labeled it. "Now we have harassment," he added. Maeve closed her eyes briefly, where Silas watched something settle across her features. Not fear. Resolve. Rowan turned to her. "We can file for a protective order." Silence stretched. Noah looked between the adults without understanding the specifics, but sensing gravity. Maeve opened her eyes. "Yes," she said. The word did not tremble. Elise remained present through the paperwork, offering quiet explanations when legal terms grew dense. She did not dominate the conversation. She clarified. She anchored. Silas stood near the edge of the lobby, arms relaxed at his sides, saying very little. He did not need to. This was not his decision. It was hers. When the forms were completed, Rowan gathered them carefully. "I'll move this through as fast as I can," he said. Maeve nodded. "Thank you." Noah slipped off his chair and walked to Silas. "Is he going to stop now?" the boy asked. Silas did not answer with certainty. "He's going to have consequences," he said. Noah considered that. Then he nodded. Oh, as if that concept alone offered relief. Atlas rose and placed himself beside Noah, not shielding, standing. As evening settled across the lake, Maeve prepared to leave again. This time she did not avoid eye contact. She did not minimize. "I can't keep pretending it's manageable," she said quietly to Silas. He met her gaze. "No," he agreed. She inhaled deeply. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days." That was new information. It carried weight. Silas did not ask for details. "That's a good plan," he said. Atlas walked with them to the parking lot as usual, but his posture was different. Less reactive. More watchful. The lot was empty. No unfamiliar vehicles idled at a distance. The air smelled of wet pavement and pine. Maeve paused before unlocking her door. "You didn't push," she said to Silas. He tilted his head slightly. You didn't need pushing. She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded. Noah climbed into the back seat. Atlas stepped back as the engine started. Maeve drove away. Silas remained standing until the red taillights disappeared beyond the bend in the road. Inside, Lakeshore was quiet again, but not fragile. Something had shifted. A photograph pulled from a trash bin. A report filed. A decision spoken aloud. Silas locked the doors as he always did. Atlas waited beside him. They had not chased. They had not escalated. But they had not ignored the line once it was drawn. And sometimes, that was how fear began to lose ground not through force, but through refusal to shrink. Maeve didn't come to work the next morning, and the absence felt different now that it had a plan behind it. Silas arrived at Lakeshore and found Dana Kessler already in her office, shoulders squared, jaw set, moving with the efficient calm of someone who could hold a building together with a clipboard and sheer will. She had that look people wore when they'd decided they would not be surprised anymore. "Rowan's pushing the paperwork," Dana told him, voice low. Maeve texted. She and Noah are staying with her sister in Burlington. Silas nodded once, the way men in uniform acknowledge information without dressing it in emotion. Inside, his mind ran its quiet inventory. Distance, time, risk. Burlington was larger, louder, safer in some ways, and more anonymous in others. Safety, he'd learned, was rarely one thing. It was layers. And Atlas sat near the entrance, watching the doors as if they might change their mind and let danger back in. The German Shepherd's harness lay ready by the hook. He didn't need to wear it to be working. He had a way of holding still that made the air around him feel more honest. Rowan Hale showed up mid-morning, not in a rush, but with a stiffness that suggested he'd been up early. The deputy's beard was trimmed close, his dark hair was damp from a quick shower, and his eyes had that stormwater look Silas recognized from men who slept lightly and listened for wrong sounds. "They're serving him today," Rowan said, getting straight to it. Silas kept his face neutral. "At his job?" Rowan gave a short shake of his head. "He's been bouncing between sites. We'll catch him at the address on file. East Side Rentals." He hesitated, then added, "It's not just a protective order request now. The photo plus the door incident gives us enough to warn him formally. Yet it matters if he violates." Silas understood the word violate differently than most people. In his world, violations had consequences measured in blood. Here, consequences were measured in paperwork, time stamps, and whether someone believed you when you said you were afraid. "Maeve okay?" Silas asked. Rowan's mouth tightened. "She's holding it together. That's not the same thing." No argument there. Before Rowan left, he glanced at Atlas. "Your dog's been on edge." "He's been accurate," Silas replied. Rowan snorted quietly, not quite a laugh. "Yeah, that's what worries me." The cruiser pulled away, and Silas returned to the gym, setting up cones for the afternoon class, telling himself he was simply keeping routine. But routine didn't erase the feeling of waiting for a footfall you couldn't predict. Later, Dana stepped out of her office with her phone in hand, face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Maeve's sister just called," she said. And the fact that Dana didn't use Maeve's name like a shield told Silas everything. Silas moved closer. "What happened?" "She wants Maeve's things," Dana said. "Clothes, Noah's backpack. Documents if we can find them. She's scared to go back to the apartment." Silas's shoulders tightened slightly. "Who's she?" "Maeve's sister. Tessa." The name landed, and with it a mental image Silas hadn't yet met. Someone who'd grown up with Maeve. Someone with the same history in their bones, but different outcomes. Dana looked up as if reading his thoughts. She asked if you could help. Silas didn't want to be the kind of man people called for this. Being called meant something had already gone wrong. Still, he heard his own voice answer before he fully decided. Tell her I can meet them at the center. We'll figure out what's reasonable. That afternoon, a dark green Subaru pulled into the lot. A woman stepped out first, and Silas knew immediately this was Tessa before Dana even introduced her. Maeve was soft in the face, and even when tired features that invited worry. Tessa had the same bones, but her expression was built like a wall. High cheekbones, eyes sharp with determination, mouth that looked like it had learned to hold back words until they were useful. She was in her late 20s or early 30s, average height, lean, wearing practical jeans, a black puffer jacket, hair pulled into a messy bun. No makeup, no softness for show. Her hands were reddened from cold, and when she spoke, her voice held the bluntness of someone who'd had to become brave early. "You're Silas," she said, not a question, studying him like a person assessing whether a tool would break under pressure. "Yes." She nodded, then looked past him into the building. "Maeve said you didn't push her." Silas didn't smile. "She did the pushing." Tessa's mouth twitched as if that almost made her laugh, but the humor didn't have enough space to live. "Good," she said. Because if someone pushed her, she'd run the other way out of spite." Dana gave Silas a look that translated as, "That tracks." Noah climbed out next, quieter than the adults, clutching a small stuffed rabbit with one ear worn thin. He didn't rush toward Atlas the way he had at Lakeshore, but when Atlas approached, Noah's shoulders lowered a fraction, as if his body recognized safety before his mind could name it. Maeve stepped out last. She looked like someone trying not to disappear. Her hair was pulled back, but not neatly. There was a faint bruise-like shadow under one eye. Not a bruise, Silas told himself. Just exhaustion. She wore long sleeves despite the warming day, and she held her keys too tightly. "Hi," she said. Silas nodded. "Hi." No extra words. No questions she wasn't ready to answer. Tessa leaned in close to Maeve and murmured something Silas didn't catch, but Maeve's breathing steadied afterward. That, Silas realized, was what sisters could do when the world couldn't, lend you a nervous system for a moment. They went inside to talk logistics. The plan was simple. Retrieve essentials from Maeve's apartment while Gavin was confirmed elsewhere. Keep it fast. Keep it documented. Rowan had advised Maeve not to go alone. Tessa wanted to go anyway. Dana offered to accompany them. Silas agreed to drive behind, not as a hero, just as another set of eyes. Atlas, predictably, refused to be left behind. They reached Maeve's apartment building just before dusk, the kind of hour where shadows lengthen and every parked car looks like it's waiting for you. The place wasn't terrible on paper 2-story units, small balconies, a patch of tired grass. Yet Silas felt the familiar unease of a location where fear had been rehearsed. Tessa moved with purpose, key in hand, scanning the lot like a person used to finding threats. Dana stayed close to Maeve, calm but alert, and Maeve's posture tightened as they approached her door, and Silas watched her fingers hover over the lock as if touching it might trigger something. Atlas stopped suddenly. Not at the door, at the stairwell corner. He sniffed once, then turned his head and stared down the hall with a hard, focused stillness that made Silas's skin prickle. The dog's ears were forward, body rigid, and his mouth was closed so tight it looked like restraint. Silas followed the line of Atlas's gaze. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass of the stairwell door. Not a neighbor passing through casually. A pause. A shift. Someone listening. Tessa saw it too. Her jaw clenched. Maeve's breath caught, and Silas felt for a second the old helpless anger that came when a predator didn't even bother to hide. Then the stairwell door opened. Not Gavin. A man in a maintenance uniform stepped out, holding a toolbox, eyes wide with the startled guilt of someone caught being present at the wrong time. He was in his 50s, heavy set, with thinning hair and a mustache that twitched when he was nervous. He looked like the type who avoided conflict by becoming invisible. "Sorry," he muttered quickly. "Didn't mean to scare anybody." Atlas didn't relax. Silas didn't either. "You see anyone else come through here?" Silas asked, voice level. The man hesitated. "Just tenants." Tessa's eyes narrowed. "Anyone waiting around?" The man shrugged too fast. "I don't know. I just fix things." Silas let the silence stretch long enough for discomfort to do its job. The man's gaze flicked toward Maeve's door, then away. "He was here earlier," the man finally admitted, voice dropping. "The boyfriend, ex, whatever, he asked if she was home." Maeve went very still. Tessa's hand closed around Maeve's forearm, firm, grounding. "Did you tell him?" The man swallowed. "I said I didn't know." Atlas exhaled, a quiet huff that sounded like judgment. Silas looked at Maeve. "He didn't say I told you. He didn't say this is why. He simply said, 'Oh, we do this fast.'" Maeve nodded, eyes glossy but focused. They entered the apartment. Inside. Everything looked normal in the way a staged set looks normal. A small couch, a kitchen counter with crumbs, a few framed photos on a shelf, one of Noah as a baby. The air smelled faintly of detergent and old coffee. Silas noticed the details that weren't normal, the way he always did. A dent in the wall near the bedroom door. A cabinet hinge bent slightly, as if someone had yanked it too hard. A chair positioned at an angle that suggested it had been moved in a hurry. Maeve moved like a person walking through a memory. She went straight to a drawer, pulled out documents with shaking hands, then moved to Noah's room. Noah stood in the doorway, clutching the rabbit, eyes on the floor. Atlas hovered behind him, like a silent sentinel. Tessa packed fast, efficient, no sentiment. She folded clothes, grabbed Noah's school bag, checked under the sink for medications. Dana took photos of the apartment condition with her phone documentation again, the quiet power of proof. Silas stayed near the entrance, listening. A door closed somewhere down the hall. A footstep paused. Atlas's head lifted slightly, ears catching a sound Silas almost missed. Silas's hand went unconsciously to the old watch on his wrist, as if time could be controlled by touch. They were nearly done when Maeve froze, holding a small envelope she'd found behind a stack of mail on the counter. It had no stamp, no return address, just her name. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single key, and a note, written in block letters, the kind that tried to look calm. "We're still a family." Maeve's face went white. Tessa swore under her breath, a sharp, contained sound. Dana's eyes hardened. Silas felt Atlas's body stiffen behind him, as if the dog understood not the words, but the intent. Maeve didn't cry. She stared at the note, then slowly folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and handed it to Dana without speaking. Dana tucked it carefully into her folder, like evidence, not tragedy. Silas nodded once. "We're leaving." They left the apartment with the bags, moving quickly, but not running. Maeve locked the door and stood there for half a second too long, eyes closed, as if she were trying to seal something inside besides the room. Then she turned away. In the parking lot, the air had cooled. The sky over the trees was bruised purple with evening. Maeve looked at Silas, and for a moment her composure slipped. "He was here," she whispered, "even after the report." Even after everything. Silas kept his voice steady. And now it's documented again. Tessa squeezed Maeve's shoulder. "You're not alone," she said, fierce and plain. Noah climbed into the Subaru without speaking. Atlas sat beside the car until the door closed, then finally relaxed into a lower stance, still watchful, but less rigid. Silas watched them pull away, then followed at a distance, my headlights steady behind them like a promise he hadn't spoken aloud. Back at Lakeshore later that night, Dana filed the photos and the note into a secure cabinet. Silas stood in the lobby, listening to the building settle. Atlas lay by the entrance, eyes half-lidded but ears still awake. Silas realized something that unsettled him. The worst part of intimidation wasn't the loud violence. It was the way it trained your body to anticipate it forever, even in silence. And then he realized something else. Maeve had still walked into that apartment. She had still picked up her documents. She had still turned away. Fear was still there. But it no longer owned the steering wheel. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Northern Vermont had shifted fully into early spring by then, the kind that carried both mud and light in equal measure. Snow was gone from the open fields, though stubborn patches lingered in shadowed corners of parking lots and beneath pine trees. The air smelled of thawing earth and river water running higher than it had a month ago. It was a season that suggested movement forward, outward, inevitable. Silas stood outside the county courthouse just after 9, hands loose at his sides, posture unremarkable but grounded. The building itself was modest brick, square, practical, not imposing, not gentle either. Its windows reflected the sky like unblinking eyes. Atlas sat beside him, harness secured, sable coat brushed and orderly, amber gaze steady. He had not been trained for courtrooms, and he had been trained to assess. The difference mattered. Maeve arrived in Tessa's Subaru 5 minutes later. She stepped out first, smoothing the front of her oatmeal cardigan as if flattening invisible creases. Her hair was pulled back neatly, no stray strands today. She looked pale, but composed, like someone who had chosen to stand in a place she would rather avoid. Noah climbed out after her, clutching the same worn stuffed rabbit. He wore a small navy jacket zipped to his chin. His eyes were watchful, but there was less flinch in him than before. He reached automatically for Maeve's hand. Tessa followed last. She wore dark jeans, boots, and a charcoal coat that fit her like armor. Her expression was controlled. Chin lifted, scanning the street and the entrance with a protective intensity that bordered on defiance. If Maeve carried fear in her posture, Tessa carried refusal. Silas inclined his head when they approached. No speeches. No reassurances that sounded like promises he couldn't legally make. Rowan Hale stepped out of the courthouse doors moments later. He was in uniform, hat tucked beneath one arm, beard trimmed, eyes calm. There was a quiet gravity to him today, less conversational, more procedural. "They'll call you in shortly," Rowan said to Maeve. "He's already inside." Maeve's breath shifted almost imperceptibly at the word he. Silas watched her shoulders rise and fall once, controlled. "Okay," she said. They entered together, the doors closing with a muted thud behind them. Inside, the courthouse was fluorescent lit and faintly stale, smelling of old paper and polished floors. A few wooden benches lined the hallway outside the hearing room. A clerk behind a narrow window typed steadily without looking up. Gavin sat at the far end of the bench row. He wore a pressed button-down shirt, sleeves rolled neatly, beard trimmed closer than before. His posture was relaxed, one ankle resting across his knee, hands folded as if attending a parent-teacher conference rather than a protective order hearing. His pale eyes lifted when Maeve entered. He smiled. It was the same smile as before, pleasant, calculated, thin at the edges. Maeve did not return it. She took a seat beside Tessa. Noah sat between them, small body upright but tense. Silas remained standing against the wall, arms crossed loosely, Atlas seated at heel. He had no legal role here. He was present because presence mattered. Gavin's gaze drifted to Atlas briefly. Something flickered there, annoyance perhaps, at an animal that refused to be impressed. The bailiff, a tall woman in her 40s with cropped gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, opened the hearing room door and called Maeve's name. Her posture was upright, movements efficient, eyes direct but not unkind. She carried authority in the way she walked, not in how loudly she spoke. They filed into the small courtroom. What the judge was a woman in her late 50s, dark hair streaked with silver, glasses perched low on her nose. Judge Eleanor Whitcomb had a face carved by years of listening to stories that blurred into patterns. Her expression held no visible bias, only assessment. Maeve took the stand first. Her hands trembled slightly when she was sworn in, but her voice, when she began to speak, did not fracture. She described the door incident, the photograph, the envelope, the key. She did not embellish. She did not dramatize. She told it plainly. Gavin's attorney, a slim man in a navy suit with sharp cheekbones and a careful smile, rose to question her. His tone was polite, almost soothing. "Ms. Holloway, has Mr. Mercer ever physically assaulted you in the presence of witnesses?" Maeve inhaled. "No." "Has he been charged with assault?" "No." "So these incidents, while concerning, could be interpreted as misunderstandings." The word misunderstandings hung in the air like something deliberately misplaced. Maeve's fingers tightened on the edge of the stand. "No," she said quietly. They could not. Her eyes did not leave the attorney's face. Silas felt something shift in the room. Not volume, not tension. Alignment. The attorney pressed once more, suggesting miscommunication, shared property, emotional distress. Gavin remained composed, occasionally shaking his head with practiced regret. Judge Whitcomb listened without interruption. When Rowan was called, he testified to the documented report, the door damage, the photograph, the maintenance worker's statement. His voice was steady, factual. The room felt small, air thin. And then Atlas stood. No command, no sound. He rose from his seated position and faced the gallery doors behind them, body rigid, ears forward. His gaze fixed on something outside the immediate circle of proceedings. Silas turned instinctively. The heavy wooden doors had shifted slightly ajar, and a shadow moved in the crack too still to be casual. Not Gavin's attorney, not courthouse staff. Someone listening. Atlas did not bark. He held. Judge Whitcomb paused mid-sentence, noticing the subtle disturbance. The bailiff stepped toward the door and pulled it open fully. A man in a baseball cap and sunglasses stepped back quickly, caught in the act of hovering. Mid-30s, lean build, unshaven jaw, clothes casual but too deliberate. He looked startled, then defensive. "Wrong room," he muttered. Rowan's eyes sharpened. "Sir," the bailiff said firmly, "you'll need to wait outside." The man retreated down the hall. Atlas remained standing for 3 seconds longer, then sat again, as if the room had returned to balance. Maeve glanced toward Silas, not in panic, in confirmation. She had not imagined it. Judge Whitcomb resumed calmly, but the interruption had shifted something subtle. The atmosphere of dismissal that Gavin's attorney had attempted no longer held. But this was not misunderstanding. This was pattern. When Gavin finally took the stand, he maintained his measured tone. He spoke of family, of miscommunication, of overreaction. He framed the key as concern, the photograph as proof of proximity, not threat. Judge Whitcomb listened. Then she spoke. Her voice was steady, unhurried. Mr. Mercer, your actions demonstrate a disregard for Ms. Holloway's expressed boundaries. The cumulative documentation, combined with intimidation behaviors, warrants protective intervention. She adjusted her glasses. The temporary protective order is granted. Full hearing scheduled in 30 days. The gavel struck once, not dramatic, decisive. Maeve's breath left her in a quiet release she did not attempt to hide. Gavin's expression shifted for the first time, not explosive anger, but cold calculation. His attorney leaned in to whisper something, and Gavin nodded once, jaw tight. As they exited the courtroom, Rowan walked beside Maeve. If he violates, we act, Rowan said quietly. Maeve nodded. In the hallway, Tessa exhaled hard, almost a laugh, but not quite. You did it, she said. Maeve shook her head slightly. We did. Noah tugged at her sleeve. Does that mean he can't come near us? Maeve crouched to his level. It means if he tries, there are consequences, she said carefully. Noah seemed to accept that. Outside, the air felt different, not safer, not suddenly gentle, but clearer. Silas stood near the courthouse steps as Maeve approached him. Thank you, she said again. He nodded. You spoke, he replied. She held his gaze for a moment longer than usual. I didn't think I could, she admitted. Atlas stepped forward and pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg. Not forceful, just contact. Maeve rested her hand briefly in his fur. For the first time since Silas had met her, her shoulders were not lifted or hollowed. They were steady. The Subaru pulled away a few minutes later, Tessa driving, Noah in the back seat, Maeve watching the road ahead. Silas remained on the steps until the vehicle disappeared. Atlas sat beside him, posture relaxed but attentive. The ground had shifted. Not violently, but enough. And sometimes, when the ground shifts and you do not fall, that is how you begin to stand. Before we close this story, pause for a moment and think about what truly changed. It wasn't a dramatic rescue. It wasn't a single heroic act. It wasn't even the courtroom decision. The real turning point came the moment someone chose not to look away. Sometimes we wait for miracles to arrive like lightning, loud, undeniable, supernatural. But more often, miracles come quietly. They show up as courage in a trembling voice, as a document signed when fear says, "Stay silent," as a loyal dog who stands without barking, reminding us that danger does not get the final word. Maybe God does not always part seas in our lives. Maybe sometimes He places steady people beside us. Maybe He sends strength before we even know we will need it. Maybe the miracle is not the absence of fear, but the presence of support when fear tries to rule. And in everyday life, we all face something that tests us. A difficult relationship, a silent struggle, a boundary we are afraid to draw. This story is a reminder that protection does not begin with force. It begins with truth. And when truth is spoken, even in a small courtroom in a small northern town, something sacred shifts. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone who needs strength, share it. Let it reach someone who may be standing at the edge of a decision they are afraid to make. Leave a comment below and tell us what courage looks like in your life. Your words might become someone else's turning point, Subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories that matter. Stories about resilience, justice, faith, and the quiet ways God moves in ordinary places. And wherever you are right now, may God protect your home, steady your heart, and surround you with the right people at the right time. May He grant you courage when you need it most, and peace when the ground beneath you feels uncertain. You are not alone.